someone opens your model and in 2 minutes cannot really figure out what is happening, the model is problematic. You need to go back and fix it, make it better. And I'll give you some tips, and we'll go over, the AFM sample mini exam and show you what you should do in order to follow some best practices. So first impressions do matter, okay? And you don't prove that you're a good modeler if you have long, complex formulas. The opposite. Your formulas have to be simple. Your model has to be transparent. You have to separate your inputs. That's one of the basic principles. Separate your inputs from your calculations and from your outputs. Okay, this is like modeling one-on-one. If you have a model where you put everything at one place, then that's increasing the amount of the human error, the chance that you have an error in your model. And one of the first things, as we said, it's to separate outputs from calculations and from assumptions. And here it's a mini exam that all of you can try, give it a try. With this training, another free training we will have soon, and also the material we will be sharing, you can give it a try. What the Financial Modeling Institute did, in order to make more accessible the AFM content to the public, they just published like 2 weeks ago this mini exam. So this is a discounted version of the actual AFM exam. So let me do a quick introduction about the AFM exam, Advanced Financial Modeler. The Advanced Financial Modeler exam, certification exam, it's the first level of the certification scheme offered by the Financial Modeling Institute. And what they test if you can actually forecast financial statements. Okay, and it's not that complicated. If you have a background in Excel and forecasting, if you do the proper practice, you can make it and pass the AFM exam. But it needs practice, and it needs to start working with best practices. You're given historical data of a company and a certain set of assumptions, and then you're required to make forecasts and build 3 statements. So in P&L, income statement, the balance sheet, and the cash flow. And there are some elements, okay, some common things that you have to put in the model. So one thing which every model should have, it's a cover page. And in this cover page, you should explain what the model is about and what kind of colors or styles in your numbers you're using, and also have a table of contents. So, for example, in this mini AFM exam, I have like a quick solution. We just say, okay, how the model should look like. So the AFM will give you just, the historicals, and then you have to do all the rest. And when we say do all the rest, create the tabs in order to forecast the statements. So as I said, one of the first things you have to put in your model, it's a table of contents. Okay. So if I just remove the disclaimer from here, and I'll say, okay, I put like a table of contents. Why do I put the table of contents? So that's easier for a user to navigate, okay? And what is the table of contents use? Everyone goes back to the table of contents when they want to go somewhere else in the model. And usually, complex business models, they have a lot of tabs. So you don't want to scroll to the right to find the right tab. You want to have the table of contents. So I'm just going to put here like assumptions and then revenue. In that manner, you just start putting all your tabs, of course, you do that as you build the model, okay? And then you create a link. So you right click here, you say link, and you go here that says place in this document, and you find the actual tab that you want to link to, okay? So now I have a link to my assumptions tab, and I click and I go to my assumptions, okay? And in a similar manner, we need to put a link back to the cover page. So I can put a link here and say back to cover, okay? I can say link and say, I want you to take me back to the cover page, okay? And now someone wants to go back to the cover page and then, click and go to another section. So you need to provide to your audience this user-friendly environment so that they can navigate through the model quickly. And one of the things you have to put there is the table of contents. Now, another thing we have to put, and I'm going to jump back and forth, it's colors, okay? Because it's much easier, okay, for a user when they open the model. It's not the model. If you build the model, it's your baby. You know what's going on if you have your own structure, okay? But that doesn't mean that someone that is using the model or is a viewer of the model can figure out what's happening. And we said, remember the 2-minute rule or my definition of the Caribbean 5-minute rule, that you need to quickly figure out what is going on there. Okay. So when we use inputs, which is one of the most critical aspects of a model, we need to color them and usually use a fill color. So how do we do it? So we go back to the model. So let me go back to the model. And we decide what will be the color that I will use in my model. And I have to use that in all my models. So you make a convention with yourself and your colleagues and your company. You say, guys, from now on, all the assumptions in our model will be used with a light yellow color or a green color. These are the two most common in the industry. And I go and I create a style in Excel. So how do we create the style in Excel? We say new cell style. And we say, I will create a new one just so that you see the process. And I say, I'm going to create a new cell style where the only thing that's going to change is going to be the fill of the color. So I'm going to now, just for the sake of the presentation, select this green one, okay, green fill. So you can select whatever color you like. Just bear in mind that people might want to print the model. So don't select something very dark. And also that in 10% of the male population, there is a color blindness, so which means that they cannot distinguish the difference between the green and red when they are looking at the screen. So that's why, because inputs, assumptions are one of the most important thing in a model, we use a fill color, so that stands out. So I do that, the name already exists, so I will just put inputs 2. And then I have a separate tab just for my assumptions, and I highlight all my assumptions with that color. Now, I could say, okay, this is the green, but so it's the same. So this is how we create the style. So we use the yellow with the border so that evident immediately that this is an input. And that means that's the only thing you can touch the model, because once you're done with the model, the person that is using it is going to only play with the inputs and the scenarios, of course. So coloring is important because it helps others figure out what is going on. What else is important when we are doing a model? The dimensions, the units, and the labels, the naming is important. If I go here, I have to say, is that in $1 million? What kind of a dollar? US dollar? Caribbean dollar, Saudi dollar? I've seen it because having traveled to many places, people have different denominations. So if I don't put it in the model, how someone else knows what I'm doing here? Is it thousands? Is it units? Is it per month, per year? So the units do matter. So you have to put the units there. So coloring and units matter. What else does it matter? So we have already said that we need to have a cover page with the table of contents. The styles will come here, most probably somewhere in my cover page. I will put my styles. So I will come here and say styles and formats, like a legend, like a cheat sheet, okay? So that everyone can see what I'm doing. And I say assumptions, okay? And then I'm gonna highlight my assumptions with that color. And this will be my calculation. So usually by default, we leave the calculations to the black font as Excel has it. So I need to help my audience to actually figure out what is happening, so that I don't violate this 2 5-minute rule of model scanning and understanding. So this is important. We made that, I just presented to you. I don't know if you're using that already. And we made that agreement that, that we are going to use the colors. I put it in my cover. You open the cover and say, they're using yellow fill for assumptions. Boom, you see that here. What other colors you're using in modeling? One very common item in financial modeling, in best practices, it is to use some other coloring for some key things in our model process. And one of the things we are using is we want to show to our audience when we are importing, when we are linking from another tab, from another worksheet, that this is coming, it's a linked, it's an imported item from somewhere else. So this is not sitting here from starters. This is coming from somewhere else. Now I'm going to show you a little trick in case you haven't seen it before. And this is about how you can go back to locate where this information is coming from. So, okay, look at that. So I'm going to just select this thing here, take out the whatever coloring we used, and you see that says auxiliary sales in 2020, it's this amount. But how do I know that where this comes from, and if this is an input, if it's something that's important, it's linked? I have no idea. So how can I fix it? First of all, I can see where it comes from. How? I can use a shortcut in Excel, control left square bracket, and it takes me to the source. So control and left square bracket will take me to the source. And if I want to go back to where I was, I can press F5 and enter, and it will get me to where I was. So if I press now F5 and enter, it takes me where I was. Now, usually in the industry, and this is something that I have seen in all the major standards, so PwC, Grant Thornton, FAST standard, which is one of the most recognized standards in the industry, and SMART, which is another standard in the industry used by Mazars. So the big four are using a certain kind of standard. They use colors. So they do put some kind of a coloring here. So you can decide whatever coloring you like. Again, don't overdo it with colors, so that they show to others that this is like imported, linked from somewhere else. And for that reason, created an imported item here, you see. I slightly change it for the presentation and put the fill. You don't need to put the fill, so it's more like evident what I'm doing. So I can select these cells, go to the cell styles, and say it's imported. So now that you are in this tab, okay, and looking at that tab here, so let me so now that you're in this tab, you know that this is imported to somewhere. And again, you can use the navigation, the control left square bracket, to take you to the source. And if I want to change that assumption, how do I know it's an assumption? Yellow, fill. So I can say, okay, this is like 600 million. And because this is linked back to my calculation, which is here, the revenue, you see that this changed. So all the calculations that are dependent on that auxiliary sales figure, they just gonna get the new figure, the 600 million, because I'm linking that. I'm not hard coding this. So keep your questions, keep notes of what we're doing. And if you have any questions, we are happy to answer and help afterwards, okay, in the Q&A session. So let me go back. So colors matter, linking matters. So another thing, very, very important, a lot of times I'm receiving models from businesses to assess if we invest money or not. One of the things I'm really scratching my head and I'm trying to figure out why they do that is this, the inconsistency in the structure. So when you build a model, each column should have a certain role, a certain, imagine that this column, it's like here, okay? So I want to forecast revenues. Let me go to revenues. Okay, this is Henderson Manufacturing, run model. This is a full model. So I will go to the mini model, but it's the same concept. After you start using those models again and again, it becomes easier for you to figure out what is happening, because it is the same concepts. Now, you see here, column M, it's for December 2018. So there is a learning curve involved in terms of the best practices and how we design the models. But what is important, I agree, once you set up your structure, you say, okay, guys, sit down. Now, every tab in our model will have the same structure, exactly the same structure. So I'm looking at operating costs. Column M, it's December 2021. Actually, here it's years, so it is the whole year. It's 2021. Column N, it's 2022. So the same for revenues. M, it's 2021. N, it's 2022. So it's not acceptable from no one in the industry to have a structure in the model where you go from tab to tab and the structure changes, because you just get lost. You know, they have done a research, operational researchers, and they have found that because as humans, our brain can process a certain amount of information. If you don't have a structure, you know, a standardized structure, when people go from one tab to the other and the structure is not the same, they just get lost. It takes more time to process the information. While if you do that, look at that. Revenue, same structure. Operating costs, same structure. Statements, same structure. So it's easy for them to follow what is happening in the model. Okay? So we use the same structure in all our tabs, with the exception of the assumption, of course, because it's a different setup, but all the other tabs where we are forecasting. Now, as you see in that model, what Nikos did and what we are doing, we have a separate tab for each main business function. So when we want to forecast revenues, we have a separate tab for revenues. You know, at the end of the day, when I finish the model in my financial statement, revenue will be just one line. But when the model goes to an investor or a decision maker or a creditor, and they want to see more details, they want to go and drill deeper and see what is going on. So they want to go back to the revenue tab and see, okay, how did you come up with that model, with that forecast? So, and a guy comes and says, I want to raise 1.5 million. I have a model. Can you give it a look? And he sends me the model. And the model is, of course, not following best practices. And I say to him, one thing you need to fix is that the structure should be the same. And the other thing of the next item here, it is that your model should cater for scenarios. And you see that Nikos has created a separate tab for scenarios where there is a drop down with, that's the minimum, the bare minimum for any model, according to the Financial Modeling Institute, according to any best practice standard in the market. Any model should at least have 3 scenarios: the base, the upside, and the downside. And when I click here in the drop down, and I'll show you how we do the drop down in case you're not familiar with that, and I select, let's say, the best case scenario, that these numbers here, the best case numbers, should populate to my calculations here and to my outputs, which is the financial statements. And this should be dynamic. Plus, everywhere in my model, in every tab, it should be visible which scenario I'm looking at. So now I'm looking at the best case scenario. How do I know it? Because it's up here, you know, and it's up here, and it's up here. You see, everywhere in the model, in the same position, I have the name of the scenario I'm running. So I have this base. Okay, the base scenario says financial statements, 1.38 million EBITDA for 2021. And then I go back and I select my best case scenario, and I see 1.45 million for 2021. So the first level of the exam requires you to follow some best practice. 1, have at least 3 scenarios. So 1, have the cover page. 2, separate inputs from outputs from calculations. 3, have scenarios. So these are things that you should have, and they are taken for granted. If you don't have them, then you just don't pass the exam. You cannot get the certificate that says you're an advanced financial modeler, okay? And these are basic things in the industry. So one very important best practice, and I already mentioned it, it's, use simple formulas. Don't put complex formulas. Don't assume that because you have good Excel skills and you put like long formulas or complex formulas, that this is it's a proof of your like good modeling skills. No, that's the contrary that's happening. You're confusing people, you're not transparent, and this is something that, it's not acceptable in today's market. So we need models that have simple formulas. And if your formula, you're working in an industry that your formula has to be like more complex for some reason, then break it down in pieces. Now, I'm going to show you this. I call it like the financial modeling nightmare. This formula that you see here. So let me bring my little tool from Zoom. This is a formula that one of my seminar participants showed me when we were doing an intro modeling course, and he says, Dimitris, please help me. We are forecasting cash flow, and we hired an Excel expert, and this is a formula in this cell here, in one cell. This is well beyond the rule of thumb. So you have to put your thumb on the screen and see if any formula you're creating, it's longer than your thumb, then this is not a good formula. Break it down, make it simpler. And of course, can you guess how difficult it's to spot an error or to audit that formula here? It's impossible, okay? So that's a thing to remember, build simple formulas, okay? And the last thing I want to say, it's simple, save, okay? Because I've seen it in the exams. I remember one other participant, unfortunately, a lady that she was in my seminars, she sit down for the exam, she passed the exam, and this lady, so she's done, like in 2 hours, she has already completed most of the solution for the exam, and then she forgot to save. Something happens with her laptop and it's crashing, and she's losing everything. And she's like really stressed because she's very well prepared. Thank God, you know, she managed like to find the strength to go back and start from scratch, finish and pass the exam. But don't forget to save, you know, because especially for the exam, it's gonna be a real pain.